Hello and welcome to another episode of the CIRS Group podcast. My name is Christian Navarro-Torres.
And I'm Barbara.
And I'm
Wait a minute.
JC.
Yes, well, welcome to another episode. But yeah, as you can see, we have our favorite guest. I think it's okay to say that at this point because this is now, I think, your fourth time on the podcast, right,
Oh,
Christian?
wow. I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm not keeping track, but that sounds like a big number.
We've covered with Christian, so go back and we'll have these episodes listed in the show notes. We've covered the neuroquant. We've covered ADHD, which Christian and I both have. We covered nicotine and its neuroprotective uses. That was a really fun one. And then what was the most recent one? JC, you always know, and
This
I
one.
never remember.
Do we have a fourth one?
No, it's
Oh,
this
it's this
one.
one.
Oh,
This
it's
is
this
the
one. Yeah, I
fourth
was like,
one.
wait. I don't think I was awake during that podcast because I
Okay.
don't remember it.
I thought for sure there was one that I had forgotten about because every time I reference Christian's past episodes, I feel like there was one that I forgot, but apparently not this time. Today, today we are going to talk about the GENIE test. This is a blood test and it is a little on the expensive side, but I have gotten it done, and we'll talk more about that later. But this is a really informative test, especially if you have stalled or if you want a really good baseline before you get started on the treatment to really see what the heck is going on in your system. But before we get into all of that, we are not medical professionals. We are not
Mhm.
your medical professionals, really. So do not take any of this as medical advice. Always consult your practitioner for anything going forward, especially about your health and your medications and all that fun stuff.
That includes me, by the way,
Yes.
as well.
Even though it is Dr. Christian Navarro-Torres.
Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Christian Navarro-Torres, as I said at the very beginning. I'm a researcher by training, with sort of background in cognitive psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience, that kind of stuff. I became a CIRS patient somewhere around 2020, and I was diagnosed in 2022. And I started the Shoemaker treatment since then, and I've been on the Shoemaker protocol. Now, the co-founder of CIRS Lab, and CIRS Lab is a community that's devoted to providing education and awareness around CIRS, bringing in a lot of the medical and scientific understanding in a manner that's accessible for patients. And we have social media platforms for that as well, but we have our own community where we have patients join the community. We also have a very recently opened or initiated practitioner membership. Practitioners that are either treating CIRS, who are Shoemaker certified, who are curious about CIRS, or who've had experience with CIRS or treating patients in that category, but are not necessarily certified in the Shoemaker protocol, but want to learn more. So we're providing a lot, or a platform where we have a lot of high level educational content for practitioners as well.
And we should say also that practitioner side of your membership is also good for health coaches too, right?
Yeah,
Anybody who
yes.
has been certified as a proficiency partner through the Shoemaker Protocol through survivingmold.com and wants to make sure that they're staying up on all of the latest developments of what is going on in the treatment of CIRS and how to help their patients and clients better. Uh, Anyone like that should definitely join or check that out. So.
Yeah,
All
great.
that
Thank
being
you.
said, part of what you do, Christian, and you didn't mention this part, is you do offer one-on-one consultations or coaching for people. And specifically, what I love, and JC and I both love to refer people to you about, is if and when they decide to get their GENIE test done. Because the GENIE, if you guys don't know, is a very complicated looking report that you get, basically, for lack of better words, out of what was tested from your blood. And it's not very straightforward because it needs to match everything else that has to do with the Shoemaker protocol. Nothing is straightforward here. But the nice part is there are people like Christian who understand what the GENIE is telling a person and
Mm.
how it should inform their treatment. So I'd love to dig into that with you. And I guess the first question, in case people don't know, is what is the GENIE?
And before I jump into that, I just want to further add to what you were saying about consultations. Yes, I do offer one-on-one consultations. It could be either, to discuss tests like the neuroplan, the GENIE, blood markers, but also things that are more involved with, with the treatment, managing your environment, figuring out next steps, things like that. But all of that is done in the context to provide additional information, unpack these tests so that you can then go back to your practitioner and have a more informed conversation around these results. What do these results mean in your case? Because often practitioners just don't have the time to explain everything in gory detail. So someone like me comes into the picture and provides that supplementary information. It gives you perspective. It might give you some insights about your situation. That's my hope, at least, that, by the time we're done with the consultation, you just have more insights about the overall picture of your situation as a CIRS profile. But it's always meant to be complementary to what you're doing with your practitioner. Going back to your question, what is GENIE? GENIE stands for gene expression inflammation explained. That's what the acronym stands for, which is a little bit weird because the N is kind of hidden. I think it's literally the N in the expression that counts as the acronym. I don't know if I'm right, but that's what I'm guessing.
It's a little N.
It's a little N, so it should be a little N. The GENIE test is it's essentially a test or a toolkit that analyzes patterns of gene activity to understand the underlying inflammatory and metabolic processes that drive CIRS. And note that I'm using the word metabolic here on purpose. So, right, CIRS stands for Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome. So the word inflammation is there. But as we've come to learn more about CIRS, it is an inflammatory response, but it is also a metabolic, or it implies metabolic abnormalities that are very profound in this illness, and they go hand in hand with the inflammatory side of the illness. So the GENIE is a tool that allows us to assess these things in a higher level resolution from some of the other tests. And maybe I'm going to take a step back here and just provide a little bit more context about what does this gene activity means. So we know that CIRS is fundamentally a problem of immune dysregulation, right? So we have excessive pro-inflammatory activity driven by extreme activation of what we call the innate immune system. And it's in response to what we call biotoxins. And I know JC and Barbara had made many podcasts touching on this basic concept. But right, we have these biotoxins circulating in the body. They trigger this inflammatory response. And those toxins, the fundamental issue is that they don't get properly recognized by what we call the adaptive immune system. So it's the other side of the immune system, which is responsible for tagging the biotoxins and helping your body eliminate them. And this immune dysregulation has all sorts of downstream effects on the body, right? Including hormonal dysregulation, organ dysfunction, and brain abnormalities. And you can think of those as sort of macro views of what CIRS is doing to the body. But it turns out that this immune dysregulation also impacts how our genes are expressed. And when we talk about genes, right, so probably a lot of you are going to think about the HLA testing, for example. And I want to make a distinction here so that you understand, how GENIE is different from the blood test that we use to look for HLA haplotypes. The HLA haplotypes, which is about measuring or establishing whether you're someone who's at risk of developing CIRS at some point in your life, that's looking at whether you have a gene present or not. It's a yes or no type of thing. It's like, is this gene present in your makeup, in your biological makeup, right? So when we talk about genetics, we're talking about the structure or the presence of a gene, and that's essentially your DNA. And GENIE is not looking at that. GENIE is looking at how those genes that you have present are being expressed. And it's not specific to the HLA. I want to make that clear. It's looking at a really long list of genes that are responsible for conducting or regulating a bunch of different processes in your body, right? Because we have tons and tons and tons of genes, many, many genes, right? And so GENIE is a way of systematically assessing specific classes of genes in terms of how they're being expressed in order to qualify or understand at a higher level in terms of resolution, what is it that the illness is causing in your body in terms of dysfunction and dysregulation. And we can measure that at the level of gene expression or gene activity. So that's basically what GENIE is in a nutshell.
So your body is like, hey, there's crazy crap going on, and I need to turn things up or turn things down depending on what is happening, or its own attempt at finding some kind of homeostasis or finding some kind of like
Yes.
way to deal with the crap
Yes.
floating around. And when your body does up or down regulate those systems, that is what the GENIE can basically test for and see. And depending on whether those systems are up or down regulated and how severely they are, that's what can help you decide with your doctor how. I mean, I guess my question, and maybe this is too big of a question, and we can figure out a better way to ask it, is like what are some of the ways that a treatment might be affected by what the GENIE is showing?
Right. So what are the benefits of having GENIE as a test, right? That's
Sure.
essentially the question.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
Um, one thing I wanted to say before answering that question is that the reason why we look at gene expression and why GENIE is looking at gene expression is because gene expression fluctuates. It's not something static, like Barbara alluded to. Things can be overexpressed or underexpressed. And it turns out that what we do over our lifespan, the environment, uh, our lifestyle, the sort of the way the body is interfacing with the environment is going to deeply impact uh, or influence how genes can be expressed. And that's the key connection here, right? That we know that CIRS is an environmentally acquired illness, and so in that sense, we can expect that there's going to be some genes in our body that are going to respond to that impact from the environment. And I think I just wanted to make that little distinction there. In terms of your question, so what is the benefit of having GENIE to inform your, your assessment and your treatment? There's a couple of reasons that come to mind. Number one, it's one way to get further confirmation of your CIRS diagnosis, right? So we have a list of biomarkers or tests that you can run, including sort of the standard blood work that's used to look at, things like MSH, MMP9, TGF beta 1, or even the HLA presence, right? So there's blood work, standard blood work that's used to diagnose and monitor the progression of CIRS. And then there's things like the VCS, and there's also the neuroquant. And so the GENIE can come in and add what I would say a lot of depth or color to that picture that you're getting from the blood work, the VCS test, and the neuroquant. And it can help create a more comprehensive picture when you put all of these tests together. So I guess I'll say this now. When you do the GENIE, it becomes an even more powerful tool when you have some of these other tests available to you, because it helps you create context around your situation. And that leads me to the second reason, which is it allows practitioners to understand how CIRS is impacting you specifically as an individual. So it's a highly customized way of looking at the specifics of how the illness is manifesting in you. And with some of the other markers, you might be able to do that to some degree, but they might be more representative of what is the general trend that we see in CIRS patients. With GENIE, you can do that too, but it just adds more bio-individuality in the assessment. The third reason that I can think of is that it can help you understand where are you in the illness progression, and where are you in terms of the illness severity from an objective perspective. So that's going to inform your treatment. What steps do you really need to hone in the treatment? Are there any add-on things that you need to do outside the Shoemaker protocol to sort of improve your recovery so GENIE can give you that? Another reason, which I think it's one of the reasons that a lot of patients often sort of think about, is that it can help you understand what is it that you're reacting to in your environment? What are your primary biotoxin triggers, right? What is it that your innate immune system is hyper-reacting to, which will help inform your decision-making in terms of how to assess or clean or remediate your environment, right? So you can get that kind of information from the GENIE. Also, it's going to reveal potentially underlying abnormalities that may not be captured by any other tests. So I'm going to give you a really quick example here, and this is actually a very recent add-on to the GENIE. So there is a new section in the GENIE that's called Parkinson's, that basically is being used to examine whether someone is at risk of developing Parkinson's sometime in the future. And right, so this is something that's really, really novel, and you're not going to get that kind of information from any of the other tests that we have. Basically, so that those would be the main reasons that I would sort of point to.
You mentioned that different sections can kind of inform treatment. Can you kind of highlight a couple of the up-down regulated combos that would indicate a specific manifestation of those side quests in CIRS?
Okay, so depending where you're at in treatment, obviously that's going to impact what the GENIE is revealing. And sometimes people do the GENIE test somewhere halfway treatment or somewhere in between the treatment steps, and they're kind of discouraged because it's not showing a lot. But what I tell them is that, well, actually, you're already, sometimes people are 1 year into treatment, maybe even more. And I'm like, well, you've been doing cholestyramine or Walco for, this amount of time. And that could easily be that things are being turned off, so it's not looking as colorful. In general, when you look at these bubbles, you're looking at either specific genes or clusters of genes. And these groups of genes or that resemble patterns of gene expressions are sorted by specific like general categories, right? So we have one here that's called metabolism, insulin, apoptosis. So we have all these categories, and within those, you're going to have the bubbles that correspond to the genes and the expression pattern. And the GENIE will color code bubbles to denote whether these genes are being overexpressed or upregulated. And when you see that, you're going to get a red color, right? And when they're underexpressed or downregulated, it's going to be colored blue. And there is an intensity aspect to it. So the deeper the color, the more overexpressed or underexpressed that bubble is essentially. In general, as a rule of thumb, what you want to see in the GENIE over the course of treatment as you progress is that if you have a lot of Christmas color-coded bubbles, that those bubbles will start to turn white. And when they look white, basically what that suggests is that the level of activity of those genes for you is comparable to the activation patterns that we see in sort of a healthy control sample that was used to sort of determine what's considered abnormal and what's considered normal. So when you have these bubbles in white, basically you're looking more like a normal, healthy person, right? And so that's the goal for most of these bubbles, if not all of them. The other thing I wanted to say before jumping into it is that not just because you have a blue bubble here and a red bubble, some other place, it doesn't necessarily mean something on its own. It's very often there's specific patterns of overexpression or underexpression for each section that is going to be what reveals whether there's some kind of abnormality, right? So I've had people, I'm just going to jump into really quickly, in the Lyme section, they see like one red and they freak out, oh, I have Lyme. It's like, no, it's not that straightforward. There's an algorithm that needs to be taken into account in terms of how many bubbles and what direction are they going. And you do some calculations, and then that can tell you, whether you're someone who could have Lyme, and whether it's an ongoing Lyme infection or if it's after treatment, sort of kind of Lyme. There's all these little things. So, you want to be very thoughtful about that. Okay, so when we're looking at hypometabolism as an example, as I've been talking about, right, we said we're looking for a lot of blue bubbles. And if that's one of you, if you're someone that's showing several blue bubbles here, usually or typically the expectation here is that the Shoemaker protocol is going to clear out these blue bubbles over time, especially steps 1 and 2, but also the last step of the protocol, the VIP or vasoactive intestinal peptide, the combination of that sequence should over time help bring these bubbles to normal or just make them look white. I guess the thing that I'll say here, instead of saying, what can you do to correct this outside the Shoemaker protocol, maybe you want to think about what things can you do to avoid exacerbating this. So things to avoid. And just as a really quick reference, Barbara does have a downregulated bubble here, which could be indicative of this underperformance of cells. So a couple of things that you might want to think about here. You might want to avoid the use of antifungals. Antifungals can potentially exacerbate the blueness or the presence of blue bubbles in this category. Another thing you might want to be mindful of is consuming things that have a lot of lactic acid. So this could be some yogurts or yogurts in general, fermented foods. Some probiotics are lactic acid producing bacteria. And so even though those things are good when you're healthy, when you have this profile of a lot of blue bubbles and your cells are underperforming in terms of energy, those lactic acid producing things can exacerbate that, and it can exacerbate some of your symptoms. So the things that I mentioned, like chronic fatigue and chest tightness and things like that. So it might make you just feel worse and more sluggish. So those are some of the basic things that you might want to avoid. Another thing that I will say really quickly there, if you have this profile, is a really good supplement that usually has a lot of benefits, but in this context, it may sometimes make things a little bit trickier, is curcumin. And curcumin is an amazing anti-inflammatory. It's also great for your liver. But when people are having underperformance in terms of cell metabolism, it can actually contribute to that, and it could make you feel even more sluggish. So it's something that you want to discuss with your practitioner. If the practitioner is bringing up, oh, maybe you want to do this for the inflammation. Well, looking at the GENIE and looking at this section can help inform that decision. So those are some tips or some things that you want to think about when you're looking at this category.
Good to know, and can confirm yogurt does not make me feel great. So that's good to know why.
Yeah, it could be. And some
Yeah,
people even
interesting.
feel soreness as if they've worked out after eating yogurt, and it's this lactic acid building up,
Yeah.
and the body's not able to clear it up.
Crazy.
So, yep. So I'm just gonna, sort of look at things that stand out based on Barbara's report that might be, important to look at it. And so the other thing that's standing out here in this test is this category here, which is basically assessing whether you're hyperreacting to endotoxins. And so when you start seeing red bubbles lit up in any of these, that usually indicates that you have hyperreactivity to endotoxins. And I don't know if Barbara has anything to add to that in terms of her experience, but the idea here then is you might want to start thinking about, okay, maybe I do have ongoing endotoxin exposure somewhere. So now you want to start thinking about how can you assess your environment, maybe do the sort of dust test for endotoxins. It's called the Endotest, offered by EnviroBiomics, right? And so you want to start thinking about those things. And in Barbara's case, this is the biotoxin that's showing up as hypersensitivity or hyperreactive um, uh, for her. So I don't know what was your experience in that? How did you go about using this?
Yeah, after I got the GENIE test and found out that endotoxin was probably my thing, I went and got the endotoxin test. And I have a two-story house, so I got three of those tests. One for the first floor, one for the second floor, and one for outside as a control sample. And it does appear that I have a slight endotoxin issue on my first floor, more so than my second, which I was surprised because my second floor is carpeted. And I thought, I have dogs and all the things. And what I ended up finding was that there's definitely an issue with my washing machine. Needed to be completely taken apart and cleaned. It smelled like sewage when we took it apart.
Mhm.
So gross. But that was probably a big factor in my situation. And so we have since rectified that, which when this GENIE happened before we rectified that. So it would be
Yeah.
interesting to see where I'm at now. I do feel
Yeah.
better, I think. So that's a good sign. And
Well,
I'm moving along on the protocol. So there's that.
yeah. And in that case, the genie was an important clue to sort of put that piece together.
Yeah, I hadn't even tested for endotoxins until the GENIE told me I
Right.
probably should. So it
Right.
was very important for me.
Great. Great.
So obviously, with how complicated the GENIE test looks, it isn't if you understand what all of those categories are. But as a CIRS patient, it's really not your job. You don't have to sit there and learn every single category and what it all means. In fact, it's probably very hard for you to do that if you're very sick because of brain fog and cognitive function issues and all the other fun stuff that comes with CIRS. So I would say that is a pretty good reason to work with someone like you, right, Christian, as far as having just somebody who is more clear-headed. And also, you have taken the time to memorize all the categories and learn what all of them mean and what they can indicate. So you can look very quickly at someone's report and identify those kinds of things, like what you just talked about for mine, the endotoxin issue, the lactic acid probability of issue thing, words. But like the fact that you're able to summarize that quickly and give me a nice clear path or direction. Like, let's say if I had met with you before I really understood what the report was telling me about, I could have known then, okay, let's examine endotoxin next. And it gives you a path forward as opposed to kind of shooting around in the dark, right? And that's the thing that you're seeing, I'm assuming, with the clients that you do work with when you're helping them with their GENIE.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. So yeah. It's very often, like I said at the beginning, people come out of these consultations. It doesn't just have to be me. It could be just by going through the genie with the practitioner with insights about, oh, I never connected these things. And I think the lactic acid example is a good example because I've certainly talked to people who are like, I start asking, are you taking any probiotics? Are you taking any of these things? And he's like, yeah. And I asked them, do you have any of these symptoms? Like, oh yeah, actually, I noticed that when I take these probiotics, my joints hurt more. It's like, okay, so there you have a correspondence. So maybe you want to talk to your practitioner on what to do there, whether you should remove temporarily the probiotics or something like that. So that's very common when you do these kinds of breakdowns.
Yeah, it's super helpful. I so how do people work with you for getting a consultation on their GENIE? What is the best way to go about that?
Yeah, so people can reach out to me or gain access by going to cirslab.com. From there, they can either contact us directly, requesting, a consultation, or they can go into the membership, which can be accessed through the cirslab.com website. And in the membership, there's actually a public space or a page where people can get more information on one-on-one consultations. And I provide sort of a breakdown of what kinds of services I offer, including the Genie and all of these things. And certainly, if you're a member of the CIRS Lab community, you do get a discounted rate for one-on-one consultations. It's a 20% discount. So that's a plus of sort of being part of the community, but you can certainly also just request one-on-one consultations, even if you're not part of the membership. So that would be the most straightforward way to get in touch with me.
Awesome. And I know one can order a GENIE test directly from the website, and we'll put the link in the description below. But oftentimes your doctor may order it, but I know with CIRS doctors, and it's just the nature of the supply demand issue, it can take a long time to get to see your doctor. And so if that is the case for you, or if you are struggling to find a good doctor right now, because of there's no good ones in your state, or you're waiting on some kind of wait list, you can at least get started on the process by ordering something like the GENIE test and getting that nice solid baseline of where you're at. And you can work with somebody like Christian in the meantime to get a direction and to start prepping for your treatment, even if you are still waiting to see a doctor. So there are some paths forward, even if you're kind of stuck in that waiting pattern that I know some people are, just for lack of enough doctors right now, unfortunately.
And we do have an episode all about Barbara's experience with getting the GENIE. I highly recommend watching it because it is quite the process. And as Christian mentioned, we are just coming off of the CIRS Summit. Tons of great content over there, including Louise Carter's talk on the GENIE. But you can go to the cirssummit.com, and either you can purchase the replays, or there are plans to restream them live in the near future. So definitely sign up there if you want more information on that.
Well, thank you so much again, Christian, for being here and for talking about this wonderful, fun resource, complicated but fun resource that CIRS patients can take advantage of if they need to.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, as always. Thank you.
And for more resources and support, you can join us over at thecirsgroup.com.
We'll see you there.